Rewriting the Reality, Understanding Consciousness. Hi, my name is Tomas Guevara, and this is the channel Rewriting the Reality. Did you know what consciousness is? It's okay if you don't, science doesn't have a definitive answer either. So don't feel ashamed. Subscribe to this channel, and you will start to remember everything. In today's episode, number 174, I am going to give you a part of the transcript from the podcast The Joy of Why by Stephen Strogatz. Then, I will explain what Dr. Seth could not. Excerpt from The Joy of Why. Stephen Strogatz, I'm Steve Strogatz, and this is The Joy of Why, a podcast from Quanta Magazine that takes you into some of the biggest unanswered questions in math and science today. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the mystery of consciousness. The mystery is that when your brain cells fire in certain patterns, it actually feels like something. It might feel like jealousy, or a toothache, or the memory of your mother's face, or the scent of her favorite perfume. But other patterns of brain activity don't really feel like anything at all. Right now, for instance, I'm probably forming some memories somewhere deep in my brain. But the process of that memory formation is imperceptible to me. I can't feel it. It doesn't give rise to any sort of internal subjective experience at all. In other words, I'm not conscious of it. So how does consciousness happen? How is it related to physics and biology? Are animals conscious? What about plants? Or computers, could they ever be conscious? And what is consciousness exactly? My guest today, Dr. Anil Seth, studies consciousness in his role as the co-director of the Sussex Centre for Consciousness Science at the University of Sussex, near Brighton, England. The centre brings together all sorts of disciplinary specialists, from neuroscientists to mathematicians to experts in virtual reality, to study the conscious experience. Dr. Seth is also the author of the book Being You, A New Science of Consciousness. He joins us from studios in Brighton, England. Anil Seth, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Strogatz, well, this is, I have to say, one of my favorite and most perplexing things to think about. I don't really know where to start with it. I mean, consciousness is so mysterious. I sometimes have this uncanny sensation, maybe like once or twice a year. I'll be looking in the bathroom mirror, shaving, and then I get this creepy feeling like, what is this lump of matter looking back at me in the mirror? Seth, yeah, welcome to my world. This sounds like a description of my everyday. Now, in one sense, you leave the mystery behind when you go and make dinner and leave your normal life. But it does have this habit of going everywhere with you. And most days, I'll have a moment like that. And I will try and train myself also just to continually reflect and meditate on this everyday miracle that we have this electrified pate inside our skull. And that somehow, in conjunction with the body and its interaction with the world, there isn't just complicated biological machinery chugging away, there is subjective experience. It feels like something to be me, and it feels like something to be you, to use a definition that comes from the philosopher Thomas Nagel. And that is really still quite astounding. It doesn't feel like anything to be a table or a chair. But this is the fundamental mystery of consciousness. And it's both a deep scientific and philosophical mystery, but also a very personal mystery. Because part of the feeling like is the feeling of being a particular person. Being the individual that you are. Being you or being me. Strogatz, you have just introduced the word self. You can be conscious of various things, you can also be conscious of having a self. Should we start to try to tease apart the different concepts related to consciousness? What is consciousness? How is it different from self-consciousness? Seth, I think that's a good idea. There's always this problem with definition when it comes to a poorly understood phenomenon. Looking back at the history of science, I think we both know that definitions aren't sort of written in stone and you settle on one and then you just try and figure out what the underlying science is. The definitions always evolve along with our understanding. And so for consciousness, the place I start is with this definition from philosopher Thomas Nagel, who simply said, for a conscious organism, there is something it is like to be that organism. It feels like something to be. Yeah, that's fairly circular. But I like it because it hits the bullseye that it's just talking about experience, and it's useful for what it leaves out. It's often tempting, and this has happened before in many other examples, of associating consciousness implicitly with something else, whether that's intelligence, or having language or behaving in a particular way. Or knowing who I am in an explicit, reflective sense of self. All of these things may be aspects of human consciousness. But consciousness in general is not the same as any of these other things. It's just the raw fact of that experience. But then within that, there are indeed further divisions that you can make. And I think this is heuristically useful in dividing up the problem so we can get consciousness from a kind of divide and conquer strategy. And there are three ways that I like to do it. There's the level of being conscious at all. You lose it when you're under general anesthesia or in dreamless sleep. Then you are conscious of what's around you, the world. And then within that, there's the experience of being yourself, of being the person that you are. Strogatz, I thought that was a terrific aspect of your book, as far as helpfulness to me as a reader, to be able to think about chopping up the problem in various ways. You mentioned 4 levels, the level of consciousness, the issue of what you call the content or contents of consciousness, what we're conscious of or what we perceive, consciousness of self, and then the 4th one, you say, is this really profound mystery of being you? Seth, well, I actually think the 3rd and the 4th are rather the same. Strogatz, okay, fine. Seth, but there are many ways of experiencing being yourself. So, we can have experiences of self without knowing that we're having these experiences. I can experience being associated with this object that's my body, and I can have emotions and moods. And all of that can in principle unfold without attaching a name and a set of memories to it. So, there are, within each of these areas of content and level and self, there are of course more fine-grained distinctions that we can make. And we can ask whether these finer-grained distinctions have any traction in the laboratory or the clinic. Do they pick out joins in nature? Or do they not? Are they things we just sort of make up? And that's part of, I think, the game of consciousness research. We can figure out which of our distinctions have traction in the real world. Strogatz, great, I do appreciate that, because on this podcast, we try to talk about science, especially big mysteries in science. But I would want to underline the word science. That there are things we can ponder that are outside the realm of science, not even testable or refutable in principle. And I take it that you really are focused on the scientific side of consciousness. I'm sure your philosophical side likes pondering the unanswerables as well. Seth, well, I don't think philosophy is just pondering the unanswerables. I think science and philosophy really work together in understanding something for which it's not clear what a satisfactory understanding would look like. Now, we don't necessarily need philosophy if we are at the stage of the Human Genome Project, or we know exactly what we're doing and it's just a sort of engineering problem of how we do it. But when it comes to consciousness, there's still a mystery not only about how it happens, but about what a successful answer would even look like. Strogatz, I appreciate your use of the word explain here because I'd like to get into the question of what you have sometimes called the real problem of consciousness as opposed to the easy problem. So, what is the real problem? My explanation. Now, let's dive into what Dr. Seth couldn't explain. Understanding consciousness. No matter how hard you try to create something using your brain, you will never create anything but a headache. No matter how much you concentrate, you will never create what you want, but what you don't want. Dr. Seth mentioned the panpsychism theory to explain consciousness, and this one is the most accurate until now. Because the brain doesn't generate consciousness, however, the brain is conscious of being an organ. But our beliefs are making this organ work in a deficient way. There is not a place where consciousness doesn't exist. Consciousness is everything. The real problem is not how to explain or predict or control the properties of consciousness, but to accept that we created everything using our perceptions mechanism. The brain doesn't generate perceptions. It doesn't generate sensory signals into actions either. That is done by the objective-subjective self, giving instructions to the brain at speeds faster than light. When our senses give information to the brain processes it according to our beliefs, then it generates analysis of what our senses input to it. After that, you react to what the brain tells you is in front of you. In some situations, you act following only your intuition, and your intuition is the subjective self contacting your objective self. We are always controlling and predicting the properties of consciousness, but we are not paying attention. Proving it is very easy to do. We can use hypnosis to prove it. Regarding the mugness of the mug, let's say that you travel to the past and encounter an early human being near a pond. To gain his trust, you offer him a gift, a colorful mug. He will never use the mug to drink water unless you show him how to do it. Now, because we invented the mug, we will use it to drink, no matter what color or form it has. All this knowledge about the mug is stored in the regional area number 2 of the consciousness for our use. That is why Marconi and Tesla had the same idea about the radio almost at the same time. Both reached this area of the consciousness known as regional area 2. The area of our dreams. And by the way, we are never in a dreamless sleep. We are always dreaming. We need to understand that we are one, meaning that we all are connected. That is why you are never unconscious, not even under anesthesia or in dreamless sleep. First, your subjective self is always conscious, and it works in perfect harmony with the objective self. That is why under hypnosis you can remember everything. Unless you are afraid of your memories and your objective self refuses to bring the memories back, therefore the doctor needs to use another approach to recover these memories. According to Seth, Chalmers asked himself, why should physical processing give rise to a rich inner life at all? The answer is very simple, to give us the purity of experience. That is why we created this reality. And billions of other realities that we are going to start experiencing in another 30 to 50 years. That is why we invented the James Webb Telescope. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and remember that you can buy my books on Amazon.com.